After my dad called me into the living room that morning and dropped the news, everything lost its color. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. My last name weighed more than usual, and the floor seemed to give way beneath my feet. He, the most inflexible man I know, was about to get married again. And not just to anyone, but to Rachel Cooper. The name didn't ring a bell, but something in my dad's annoyingly serene expression told me nothing would be normal from then on. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like to access more stories like this. I'm Aiden Parker, 20 years old, and the son of a colonel. If you thought that sounds austere or difficult, you haven't even heard half of it. I grew up in Boston amidst silent dinners, mandatory training, and gazes that demanded performance, even in how I sat at the table. Ever since my mom died, he seemed to forget what it meant to be human. He raised me with restraint in my gestures and vigilance in his eyes. I was educated with norms, rules, and more rules. But relationships, affection, I only heard about that when I read books in secret. The news of the new marriage ended up being the push I needed. I wasn't going to stick around to see another woman try to save a man who didn't want to be saved. I grabbed my phone and texted the only person who never demanded anything from me, my Aunt Margaret. In less than a week, I left Boston behind, along with the constellation of obligations the Parker surname always imposed on me. Maple Valley was a few hours away, an almost forgotten village on the map, known for its plantations and a lazy winter that seemed to last all year. But it was free, and I needed to taste that freedom. What you hear here is just the beginning. The complete stories, unfiltered and with all the details you can imagine, are available now. See the link in the description right now. Margaret was my dad's complete opposite. Warm, affectionate, messy in the best way. Her house was a jumble of good smells, crooked paintings, and old furniture that told their own stories. On the first day, she gave me a room with a twisted iron bed and a flannel sheet. She said there were no rules there, just respect. I almost laughed, as if freedom was that simple. In my first few days in Maple Valley, I woke up before the sun out of pure habit. I walked through the garden with coffee in a chipped mug and watched the steam rise as the cold bit into my bones. The school was nearby, an old red brick building with windows that didn't close properly. I enrolled more to finish the year than out of interest. I just wanted to be quiet, disappear, be anonymous. No one there knew my dad was a colonel. No one even knew who I was. My routine quickly took shape. I woke up early, helped Margaret feed the chickens, and spent the mornings reading or studying. In the afternoon, I went to school and stayed quiet at the back of the classroom. I observed more than I spoke. In a short time, I noticed who was in charge, who pretended to be in charge, and who wasn't in charge at all. And it was by paying attention to these details that I saw him for the first time. Logan. Tall, shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows, messy hair like he didn't care, but he definitely did. He walked through the school hallways as if he had authority, but he wasn't arrogant. People liked him. You could tell by how they reacted to his presence. He was the kind of guy who could break up a fight without raising his voice. On my third day of school, he leaned against my desk. "You knew?" he asked, without beating around the bush. I nodded. "Aiden. Logan," he said with a short smile. "Parker, right?" I nodded again. When he repeated my last name, I felt a slight prickle on the back of my neck, the feeling of being watched. "You the Colonel Parker's kid?" The question didn't surprise me. The town was small, but my answer came out dry. "Yeah." He gave a small smile, cleared his throat slightly, and walked away. No jokes, no more questions. And that unsettled me more than any judgment. In the following weeks, we ended up bumping into each other more and more. Swapping books at the library, an impromptu collaboration on a history project, a request from the principal to help set up some event. He wasn't exactly friendly, but he was direct, to the point where he made me stop and think about his words after every conversation. For example, the day I dropped my notebooks next to the patio, he bent down to help, picked up the last one and said, "You're a good person. Don't need to wear that armor all the time." Without looking at me, he stood up and left, and I stood there, holding paper and silence. Margaret gradually noticed my change. She asked me if I had made any friends yet. I said yes, even though I wasn't sure if Logan fit into that category. The truth was, he fluctuated. Sometimes he'd ignore me for 2 days, then strike up a conversation like we were solving an unfinished account. One day, he showed up in Margaret's backyard with a toolbox. He said his mom, Rachel, had asked him to fix the front fence. I froze. Rachel. The same name. The blade of coincidence cutting deeper than expected. Rachel is... I started. My mom, he finished, not looking at me. We were silent for long seconds. He started hammering one of the loose stakes. I watched from a distance, trying to pretend there wasn't a stumble in time happening. The revelation screamed in my veins. We were the children of the people who were about to get married. They didn't say anything, I commented, as if he would deny it. I just found out too. So, we're going to be stepbrothers? He leaned the hammer against one of the supports, turned to me, and said firmly, "We're nothing yet. Just kids of two confused people trying to restart their lives. That doesn't obligate you to like me, or me to like you." "Who said I don't like you?" He narrowed his eyes, and for a moment, I felt that cold atmosphere warm up. From then on, something shifted. We started sharing simple tasks, cleaning the yard, painting the old part of the shed, getting groceries. Logan came over more and more, and sometimes for no clear reason. In the moments he wasn't talking, I saw everything in his eyes. Tiredness, loyalty, a kind of restlessness that mirrored my own. Margaret encouraged it. Without saying it directly, of course, but she offered cold lemonade when we were together, suggested Logan stay for dinner, and let the house music play louder. She noticed before either of us what was growing there. Something subtle, but constant, like threads of light through cracks. One afternoon, we went to fix a faucet in the yard together. He was bent over the pipes. I was holding the flashlight. The sun was setting and crossed his profile. The line of his jaw, the muffled sound of his breathing, his shirt damp with sweat. Everything seemed different. That closeness created a tension that was hard to hide. Sometimes, a shoulder would brush against mine, and without realizing it, I'd hold my breath. It was that day that Logan blurted out, "Do you feel at home here?" "Not yet, but I feel less hate than I did in Boston." He gave a half smile. "You've got a lot bottled up inside, don't you? And so do you. You just pretend you don't." The look he gave me wasn't defiant, but of recognition, understanding, as if he understood the language of the silences we had carried for years. From then on, small gestures became frequent. He'd wait for me at the school door, pass notes saying Margaret cooked better than any restaurant, show me hidden places in town to escape adult conversations. And when I went back to my room at night, I'd catch myself smiling alone, not quite understanding why. It was in the calm of these actions that something began to emerge internally, without announcement, without scandal, just the quiet confession that something was growing. I wondered in the dark of my room if my dad had ever felt something similar. If there was space for that in the world he tried to force me to live in. But in that interval came the shock. One day, I found a letter in the living room picture frame. It was from Rachel, handwritten, saying that her wedding with my dad would be in 2 weeks and that she hopes Logan and Aiden get along. The words pounded in my head. I couldn't pretend we were just two guys getting along by coincidence anymore. The pieces were fitting together in a twisted way. And that night, as I washed the dishes and Logan dried next to me, the silence swallowed us whole, until he blurted out, "Have you told anyone what's going on here? And what exactly is going on?" He looked at me with more than just his eyes. There was urgency, anguish, expectation. "I'm trying to figure it out." I took a deep breath. My fingers found his, there, by accident or impulse. I didn't pull away. Neither did he. Me too. That was the first real spark. Not a kiss, not an open confession, but the acknowledgement. An intimate truce between the two of us and everything that existed around us. There was still a lot to face, a lot to talk about, but this much I knew. The next time our parents talked about forming a family, maybe the idea wouldn't be as simple as it seemed. Because there, in the midst of the confusion, something much stronger had already begun, and there was no turning back. Everything became clearer after that night in the kitchen. After our fingers touched, even for a few seconds, a different kind of silence filled the space between us. The kind of silence that holds more than any long conversation could ever put together. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. We just finished drying the dishes and went our separate ways. But what was once doubt became certainty. The tension between us wasn't just discomfort. It was anticipation. The next day, we didn't see each other in the morning. He didn't show up at school, nor did he stop by Margaret's house as he often did. I felt uneasy. I even thought I might have misinterpreted everything. Maybe it was just my desire to see a reflection. But in the late afternoon, his footsteps on the porch sounded like a dull relief. He didn't knock. He just opened the back door and walked in as if he already felt part of the house. "Your aunt asked me to help with the boxes in the attic," he said casually, avoiding my gaze. I nodded and went upstairs ahead of him. Margaret's attic was an organized chaos. Old chests, boxes covered with antique cloths, cobwebs occupying the corners. I cleared a space between two crates, and we started moving things one by one. Neither of us said anything for a few minutes. Just the sound of crumpled paper, creaking wood, objects being repositioned, until he found a box of photos. He sat on an old rug and slowly began to flip through them. I knelt beside him, silently. The photos were black and white, people I didn't know, fixed smiles and colorless portraits. "There's something strange about all this, isn't there?" he said. "What?" "Us." I took a deep breath. I'd been waiting to hear that phrase since our fingers touched. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded slightly. "It's not wrong," I added, quietly, more to myself than to him. "But it's hard." We stayed there, side by side, leaning over memories that weren't even ours. And it was as dusk faded, as the light streamed through the attic cracks, that everything began to change pace. His hand, without warning, slowly slid over mine, which was still holding one of the old photos. I didn't pull away. The warmth of his touch seemed to pulse all the way to my shoulder. The whole world slowed down. Inside, heat and dust mingled in the air, but nothing was uncomfortable. He turned slightly, his face tilted towards mine. I closed my eyes for just a second, less out of fear, more like someone preparing to dive into cold water. When our lips touched, it was subtle at first. A slow stretch, almost a whisper of skin. The wood creaked beneath us. A distant bird sang, but everything seemed to fade into the background. My entire body listened only to that kiss, the first that seemed to have traveled miles of silence to happen. Our breathless gasps, the uncertain touches, everything had the hesitation of someone crossing a line for the first time, but also the impulse of someone who had held it in for too long. "I thought about this so many times," he whispered, his forehead resting against mine. His eyes closed. Me too. The light had already vanished, and the attic slowly plunged into a comfortable twilight. He pulled my head to his chest, and I listened to the beats of his heart. Steady, fast, like my own. We stayed like that for long minutes, without moving, without speaking, just absorbing. There. Everything was new, intimate, but unhurried. I don't know how or when we decided to come down from the attic. I just know that, suddenly, we were sitting on the living room floor where the lamplight cast soft shadows on the wall. Margaret had gone to visit a friend that night, which, at other times, would have been an irrelevant detail. But that night, it was exactly what allowed the world to spin without interruption. Logan sat beside me, legs crossed, and remained silent for long seconds, as if listening to something deep inside himself. Even disparate in routine, our silences matched. "Are you cold?" he asked, looking at my hands. "From my chest in sometimes." He smiled with one corner of his mouth, that smile that says more than his face can even show. Without saying anything, he leaned closer and touched my shoulders with his warm arms. The touching turned into a hug. The hug turned into support. And from the support, a slow, firm, and intense journey began. He held me with impressive tenderness. There was no rush in his hands, just intention. He touched me as if discovering music where there had only been noise before. And every touch, every approach, was built with care, as if time, for some mysterious reason, had been suspended just for us. No part of my body escaped the tender warning of his warmth. When my fingers found the skin of his back, it was like touching something sacred. I felt every shiver as if it were my own. Our bodies molded into each other without words, guided only by breath and pauses, which spoke more than any sentence. His breath was warm and firm against my neck. Sometimes, his eyes would close, as if he didn't want to miss a single fraction of that moment. His touch on my chest wasn't invasive, it was safe, as if he wanted to make sure I was still there, that it wasn't an invention. There, in that forgotten room of the world, we felt the boundaries between body and spirit begin to disappear. There was no external noise. There was no future or past, only the now ignited, pulsating, tense, and inexplicably light. The mix of smells, his cheap soap, the worn wood of the floor, my almost evaporated perfume, created a visceral, unforgettable environment. At times, we seemed like two reflections chasing each other in the dark, completing each other in memory and desire. Everything had texture, temperature, sound. His touch moved up and down as if drawing secret maps, and every time he breathed deeper, I felt like holding my breath, not because I was scared, but because I didn't want to miss anything. Every movement of his demanded a response, and I gave it. With my eyes closed, with my skin attentive, with my heart free. Our hands slid from arms to backs, from backs to waists. A silent communion. The softness of his t-shirt, the warmth of my body vibrating against his. It all made sense in a new way. I understood in that moment that desire between two men isn't just about touch. It's about contained urgency, about the cracking of silence, about everything they never taught us to look at. It was a meeting, whole, body, memory, flesh, and inner space. And when everything calmed down, when our hands were intertwined over one's chest and the other's leg, I took a deep breath. I felt as if I had lived a lifetime there that night, and, at the same time, as if everything was just beginning. He looked at me now, as if he knew exactly who I was, and for the first time, I knew too. I woke up before the sun. He was still sleeping on the makeshift sofa bed we'd put together with cushions. His feet hung over the upholstery Margaret was always saying she'd throw out. The timid morning light barely touched his face, and for some reason that broke me inside, not with pain, but with surprise. I never thought a moment of peace could cause such a physical impact. I got up, went to the kitchen in silence, and stared at the kettle before turning it on. I felt something strange between my chest and stomach, as if my body already knew that from then on, everything would change. I made coffee slowly, wanting to savor those minutes where everything still felt suspended. When he woke up, he accidentally knocked over a cushion. He looked around and, for a quick second, seemed lost, until our eyes met. "Morning," he said, his voice raspy with sleep. "Morning," I replied, handing him the mug. We sat on the floor, leaning against each other. Everything in the same place, but with a different frequency. My body tired, but light. My gaze serene. The question, however, didn't take long to come. What are we going to do about this? He didn't need to explain this. It was in the gesture, on the skin, in recent memory. I took a deep breath and stared at the cup halfway to my mouth. "First thing is to stop running." He nodded slowly, like someone who expected that answer but still didn't know how to deal with it. "And then? Then we'll see. But together." He ran a hand through his hair, sighed, and replied, "Being by your side is being harder and easier at the same time." "Makes no sense," he said, laughing. "But it's real." We fell quiet after that. The silence this time wasn't tense. It was merely contemplative. Each of us digested that morning like someone examining the shards of something precious that had just fallen but survived. I thought about my dad, about Rachel, about what would come next. How would she react? How would he react? Maybe there would be shouting, rejections, endless arguments with words hanging heavy in the air. But there, with Logan beside me, I realized it didn't matter so much what would come. What mattered was what we had just built. It wasn't just skin. It was a decision. And even with all the implications, for the first time in my life, I was willing to face them all. The news hit like a moving train without a whistle. Rachel and my dad had set the ceremony for 2 weeks from then. A simple dinner, sort of a private celebration. A new beginning, in my dad's words, as if he knew what that meant. Margaret told us what she'd heard from the neighbor, and that's when it really sank in. Logan and I would officially be brothers, at least on paper. My stomach clenched instantly, as if all the previous nights, all the kisses, touches, glances had just moved from memory into forbidden territory. The air grew denser. Conversations between Logan and I became rarer, not for lack of feeling, but because for the first time, reality clashed head-on with what we felt. In a few days, words became heavy. He came at different times, answered me with broken phrases. He seemed to swallow everything he wanted to say and made excuses for what used to be natural. "We need to talk," I blurted out, one afternoon that threatened rain but didn't deliver. He was leaning against the front gate, his gaze lost in the garden as if searching for meaning in flowers that hadn't even bloomed yet. I know. It took a while. I stood. He had his back to me, until he turned around. "Maybe it's better to take a break," he said, not looking directly at me, "until things calm down." I stared at the ground for a few seconds, trying to process how the words fit together. Calm. Time. Better. Take a break from what, exactly? From what I feel, or what the town will feel about it? From what's going to hurt more down the line? I took a deep breath. That wasn't cowardice. It was fear. Legitimate fear. But even so, it burned. "Are you scared of being the brother who went too far?" I asked, lowering my voice. "Because if that's it, I am too. But I'm here." He discreetly clenched his fists and took a step back, leaning against the side wall of the house. I'm scared of everything. Of me. Of you. Of looking at my mom after this. And especially of your dad. Silence. The kind that deafens. But if we run now, I continued, then all this was for nothing. He looked at me. There was no anger. Just fragility. Let me think, he mumbled. I just need some time. And for the first time, since everything, he left without touching me. His absence left marks in the small details of my routine. The cup he used stayed there, stained in the cupboard, gathering dust. The tools he moved from the garage were still out of place. Margaret didn't ask directly, but she watched me more than usual. And me? I pretended I was fine. I buried the longing by digging in the garden dirt. But it didn't take long to realize that wasn't enough. I needed to do something, even if it was just for myself. The following week, I went looking for Logan at the garage where he worked. I rang the bell and waited. The door was opened by an older man, his uncle. He looked me up and down as if he already knew who I was. No words. He just gestured with his chin to the back of the shop. There he was, his back to me, working on one of the cars, shirt stained with grease. And yet, every gesture of his was familiar, almost intimate to my gaze. I approached silently and stopped beside him. I'm going to tell them, I blurted out, my voice firmer than I imagined. He stopped but didn't turn around. This isn't going to end well. I'd rather have a real earthquake than live pretending nothing happened. Are you sure? I'm sure about what I felt with you. And if that's dirty in their eyes, screw it. I won't sleep in peace pretending it was just a slip-up. He finally turned around, his face sweaty, his eyes red, maybe from sleep, maybe from life. But there, across the workbench, we looked at each other with something different, with determination. I just don't want them to think I took advantage of you, he said, his voice thick. The only abuse would be lying about what we feel. I went home lighter. Not because I knew what was coming, but because I finally decided to stop running from what was true. I told Margaret everything the next night, while she was watering the plants. She wasn't shocked. She just held my hand, her eyes glistening. Sometimes, the courage to love causes more surprise than the cowardice to hate, she said. It will hurt, yes, but I'm with you. 2 nights later, in an almost cinematic attempt, I gathered everyone in the living room. My dad, Rachel, Margaret, and Logan, sitting in the corner of the sofa, tense. I started by saying I needed to talk, and I talked. Everything, from the first touch to the last silence. My dad's eyes narrowed. Rachel covered her mouth with her hand. Margaret, firm. You have no idea what you're doing, my dad said. This is an abomination. Love? I retorted. Because if it's about genetics, we don't even share blood. And if it's about morals, then show me exactly where it's written that we can't feel. Rachel started crying. My dad stood up, visibly agitated, but Margaret held him back with a stern look. Logan remained still, quiet, but firm. The conversation didn't end well, but it ended, which mattered. After a lot of arguing, slamming doors, and scattered tears, a controversial and heavy agreement was proposed. 1 year. 1 year to prove that what we had was real, that it wasn't just impulse or an act of rebellion. We would have to live under conditions, no scandals, no one sleeping outside the house, focus on studies, and most importantly, respect for the family structures they were trying to create. It wasn't ideal, but it was something, and more than that, it was a chance. Time is a more detailed test than anyone could predict. A year might seem like just a count on the calendar, but when you're trying to prove that your love isn't imaginary, it becomes resistance. In the months that followed, we faced everything you'd expect: judgmental looks at school, awkward silence at the dinner table, snide comments from neighbors and teachers who pretended not to see. And sometimes, even we doubted ourselves, because it was exhausting. But we didn't give up. We were discreet, but constant. Logan held my hand on days when everything felt too heavy, and I made him laugh every time his eyes darkened with fatigue. We read books together. We studied sitting on the garage floor. We planned small things: a trip, a future, maybe a place of our own. Our parents? Over time, they started to give in. They understood it wasn't a game, that if it were just desire, it would have disappeared with the difficulties. But it didn't disappear. It grew. Margaret was our fortress. She was there for everything. She advised, protected, questioned when necessary. Rachel started looking at Logan with more tenderness when she realized he was better, more whole. And my dad, well, My dad still falters, but he no longer shouts. And that, coming from him, is progress. The year passed, and no one doubted anymore that we were real. In our last family conversation, my dad called me into his office. He wasn't angry. He was thoughtful. "I never learned to love properly," he said. "But now I understand that what you two have isn't a whim. It never was. And it's good you realized in time." He nodded. For the first time, he squeezed my hand. He didn't say anything else. But for the first time, too, I felt he didn't need to. Today, I'm writing these words sitting on top of the hill Logan showed me the day everything seemed lost. He's beside me, dozing under the weak morning sun. Margaret's house looks smaller from up here, but it still holds the immensity of everything we've lived through. What did I learn? I learned that love, when sincere, challenges even those who raised us. That it's worth staying, even when it seems easier to run. That hiding doesn't protect, it just delays. And that loving a nearly brother doesn't have to make sense to everyone, just to us. So if you've made it this far, and this story has touched something in you, remember that we don't have to fit into old molds. We can build new ones. With truth, with courage, and with patience. What you hear here is just the beginning. The complete stories, unfiltered, and with all the details you can imagine, are available now. See the link in the description right now. If you like this story and want to follow others that also challenge labels and embrace the unexpected, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Here, we tell stories of real feelings, unashamed to name love. Until next time, Aiden.